He had a wife and 3 children, and worked as a milk tanker truck driver. Actually, a lot of Amish families were his customers, and he would see them frequently as he picked up milk from the Amish dairy farms. Frank and his family lived in Georgetown, Pennsylvania, which, like Nickel Mines, was a very small town located in Bart Township, Lancaster County. October 2nd, 2006, started like every other morning for Frank and his family. Frank had finished his truck driving shift around 3 a.m., and he went home to sleep for a couple of hours before getting up with his wife to get the children ready to start their day.
He walked the children to the school bus, and he called them back off to give them a hug.
So he knew, most likely, what he had intended to do that day.
Absolutely, he knew, yes.
Usually after the children and his wife were gone for the day, Frank would go back to sleep before starting his next late-night shift. Every day Frank was reminded of what he didn't have, however. He and his wife had a daughter 9 years earlier, but she passed away 20 minutes after she was born. They named her Elise. Frank thought about Elise every day, and though he loved his children that were here on Earth with him, he couldn't help but think how different his life would be if Elise had survived. When Frank called his wife shortly after 11 a.m. on that fateful day, he explained to his wife how angry he was, especially with God. He blamed God for taking Elise away from them.
She was born premature at 26 weeks of pregnancy, and there would be times that I could see him suffering from mild depression off and on throughout the years, but it wasn't anything that interfered with his ability to go to work or to engage in our family. And as I talked to him about it, encouraged him to talk with someone, he thought that he could handle it on his own, but it wasn't something that really pointed to this type of circumstance.
As his wife was trying to calm him down, he started yelling that he had molested 2 of his young family members 20 years prior, when he was just 12 years old. Frank went on to say that he was having urges to molest again and didn't know what to do to fight these evil thoughts. What Frank was saying just wasn't making any sense to his wife. She thought that she knew her husband and definitely didn't think he was the pedophile type. Or was he? Did she really know him at all? After investigators learned that Frank confessed his disturbing thoughts to his wife, they immediately started investigating his claims of molesting 2 family members. The investigators located the family members, but they both denied that such crimes ever took place. Even though they would have only been 3 and 5 years old when the molestation took place, both of them were adamant that if they had been molested, they would remember it.
From the interviews by the Pennsylvania State Police, both sides of his family were interviewed. His parents, his wife, they had no knowledge of any molestation affecting any family member or anyone else. And this was a complete surprise to them. There were 2 minor family members that are alleged to have been molested as of this time, but this is solely based on the statement from, we have no other confirmation of that at this time. That we believe these minor relatives, and this is alleged to have occurred 20 years ago, were between 3 and 5 years old. It's unknown what type of molestation, whether it was fondling or inappropriate touching or sexual assault, or if anything occurred. We don't know. We tried to confirm whether there was ever a report made of such a crime, and we were not able to confirm that a report was ever made. And we have not been able to confirm that something actually occurred, but we know that he is making reference to this. He mentioned suicide in his suicide note, that he was having dreams of molesting again. Some of the motives or reasons, again, we cannot tell with any degree of 100% certainty what he was thinking, but we're trying to piece together from the information he left behind and the evidence we gathered a better picture of what was going through his mind.
Why would Frank make up such awful accusations incriminating himself? Was he looking for an excuse as to why he was having these awful urges? Frank was a quiet man, and most definitely not a conversationalist of any sort. When one did try and converse with him, he would only respond with one-word answers. He was born in Lancaster County on December 7th, 1973. His dad was a police officer, and his mom worked at an organization that staged Bible plays. Frank never went to public school. He was homeschooled his entire life and later graduated from a homeschooling program. He had no criminal record whatsoever, and those that knew him best still can't believe he would have committed that terrifying massacre. Shortly after the massacre, Emergency workers had gone into the schoolhouse to clean up as much as possible. They wiped the blood from the floor, chairs, walls, and desks, and swept all of the broken glass from the broken windows.
Children are something you just think you're just never going to get those images out of your mind. I'm not saying others aren't, just as horrific sometimes, but children just take a knife to your heart. The thing that I can't get out of my mind, one thing is this cute sign they had made that said, make sure I get the words right, "Visitors bring joy to our school." And Amanda and I kept looking at that, thinking, this visitor didn't bring joy to the school. They're so open, they're so trusting, as all children, they're so innocent. And all around that sign, "Visitors bring joy to the church," were the smiley faces. That visitor did not bring joy.
After the emergency workers had cleaned what they could, the students' parents were allowed back into the school to retrieve their children's belongings. Many of the parents of the students that had died took their daughter's artwork and hung it proudly in their homes. About 1 week after the massacre, school resumed once again, but in a fellow Amish community member's garage. Emma was there on the first day that classes resumed to meet those students who were too nervous to go back to a place that they once considered safe. 10 days after the shooting, on October 12, 2006, the West Nickel Mines School was torn down. It held too many awful memories for the Amish to continue to use it.
It would have been hard for the families to see the building and, that it would have reminded them of what had happened, and they're going to rebuild and go on. That's how the Amish community does. They're good people.
It was a lot of somber faces, as I said, a lot of just talking about the last couple weeks and how we need to go forward, forgive, go forward. That's the message that's been put out by the Amish.
All communities came together in the aftermath of the shooting, not just Amish communities. Amish shops and stores, as well as English stores, displayed collection boxes for people to donate money towards the nickel mines Amish community. An enormous amount of donations were given, about $4 million. But because of the religious beliefs of the Amish community, they were prohibited from having health insurance, so the donations were greatly appreciated and needed. In April of 2007, just 6 months after the schoolhouse was torn down, a new school was erected. The new school was aptly named the New Hope School. As mentioned at the beginning of the episode, the Amish are some of the most forgiving people in the world. It doesn't matter who they are forgiving or what they are forgiving a person for. They can always find it in their hearts to forgive that person. After Frank had killed himself and the shooting had ended, Amish members were outside of the schoolhouse telling other Amish people that they must not think evil of this man. Just hours after the shooting, several Amish community members had gone to Frank and his wife's home to offer their forgiveness to them. They also visited Frank's family members, as well as his in-laws.
An Amish angel, dressed in black, named Henry, came knocking.
Henry just kept saying, "We love you. We don't hold anything against you. We want you in our community. And we forgive. We forgive your son." And it was just so amazing.
I was in my parents' home and looking out their kitchen window. I saw some Amish men coming down the street, and I knew they were coming to my parents' house. And
What
I said,
did you think then?
Well, I couldn't figure out what to do, and I went to my mom and dad and said, "What do I do?" My dad said that he would go out and talk with them. And so I saw the exchange on the driveway. I couldn't hear them, but I saw them put their hand on his shoulder and wrap their arms around him. And as he came inside, he told us that they had forgiven and they were extending grace and compassion over our family.
The Amish community had wrapped their arms around Frank's wife and children, even going as far as setting up a donation fund for their family. After all, the Amish families weren't the only victims of the shooting. How could they blame Frank's wife and children for the massacre he had created? They simply couldn't. On October 7th, 2002, Frank's funeral was held. He was buried right next to his deceased daughter, Elise. In addition to the approximate 40 mourners that were at Frank's funeral, About 30 of the Amish community had also gone to show their support.
As we arrived that day at the burial site, the Amish came out around the sheds, and about 30 to 40 Amish came and surrounded us like a crescent prayer covering, kind of protecting us from the big media cameras out on the street.
And to protect you.
To protect us. And the first two parents that came up and greeted us at that funeral were the parents that lost not just one daughter, but two daughters at the hand of our son.
There was a lot of criticism from the media towards the Amish regarding how they had reacted to the shooting and how quick they were to forgive. Many people thought that some people don't deserve forgiveness, and that Frank was one of those people. But in the hearts of the Amish community, they knew they were right to forgive, and they don't regret how they handled themselves after the massacre. And that is the end of today's episode. Remember to always say something if you see something. You don't know whose life you could be saving. Make sure to check us out on social media. We have a newly formed discussion group on Facebook. Just search for Active Shooter, the podcast discussion group. You can also find us on Instagram at Active the Podcast and Twitter at Podcast Active. For just $1 a month, you can get access to ad-free episodes, early release episodes when available, and a shout-out on the show. Just go to www.patreon.com/Active the Podcast. Thank you, and be safe.
Hi there, this is Levi Page. I'm the host of the true crime podcast, Crime and Scandal. Join me as I take you on all the twists and turns of the unsolved mysteries that keep you up at night, the criminal trials that rivet you, and the scandals that rock the headlines. Subscribe to Crime and Scandal on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's Crime and Scandal, your next true crime audio addiction.
Do you like it weird and dark? Listen to two redheads talk about true crime, paranormal, and other dark subjects on All Cats Are Gray in the Dark. Now on Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify, and more. Explicit language and trigger warnings. This is not for everyone. We talk hard.
Sources: Amish Grace, The Forgiveness Transcended Tragedy by David Craybill, Stephen Nolt, and David Weaver Zurcher. Mike Argento from the York Daily Record, The Associated Press, Nancy Peterson from the Philadelphia Inquirer, Caitlin Former, Natasha Singh, and Suzanne Clark from the ABC News, CrimeInvestigation.com, Julie Sharper, Lynn Anderson, Matthew Brown, and Justin Fenton from the Sun Reporter, Mark Skolford from the Pocono Record, Daniel Burke from CNN, David Koshanewski and Gary Gatley from the New York Times, Colby Itkowitz from the Washington Post, Rupert Cornwell from Indie Voices, Mara Boson from the New York Daily News, Marielle Morier from the Lebanon Daily News, and Candy Woodall from PennLive.com.